Charlotte Hayes sat by the window of her small London flat, watching raindrops race down the glass. She held her hands gently over her stomach, the tiniest smile tugging at her lips. She was 6 weeks pregnant. 6 weeks into what she believed was the start of a beautiful future with James Whitmore. James had always been magnetic. When they met at a friend's party 3 years earlier, Charlotte had been drawn to his confidence. He had a way of looking at her, as though she was the only person in the room. In those first months, he had made her feel like she was living inside a romance novel. Grand gestures, late-night walks along the Thames, whispered promises under the city lights. Now, with a baby on the way, Charlotte believed their love was stronger than ever. She pictured a small house outside the city, maybe a garden where their child could play. James had always talked about wanting children. Someday, he had said with that boyish grin. And now someday had arrived. But James had been distant lately. She told herself it was stress from work. His job at a financial firm kept him busy, with long hours and endless deadlines. Yet sometimes, when he came home late, Charlotte caught a flicker of something in his expression. Guilt. Or maybe she was just imagining things. That evening, James arrived home later than usual. His tie hung loose, his hair ruffled, and he smelled faintly of expensive cologne that wasn't his. Charlotte tried not to notice, tried to focus on the joy she wanted to share. "I made your favorite," she said softly, pointing to the pasta waiting on the table. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, love." Her heart raced. She wanted to tell him the news tonight. Maybe it would bring them closer again. Maybe it would remind him of the bond they shared. "James," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, I have something to tell you." He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The room went silent. For a moment, she saw something flash in his eyes. Shock, maybe fear. Then he forced a smile. "Pregnant? Wow, that's unexpected." Charlotte's heart fluttered nervously. Unexpected, but good, right? James leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, of course. Good." But his tone was flat, his smile brittle. She tried to push away the sinking feeling in her chest. She wanted to believe this was the beginning of their forever. She had no idea it was the beginning of her undoing. Over the next few weeks, Charlotte noticed the distance growing. James became harder to reach. Late nights, vague explanations, his phone always turned face down on the table. She tried to reason with herself. He was just stressed. Men often struggled to process news of fatherhood, she thought. He just needed time. But the truth weighed on her. At times, when he looked at her, there was no warmth in his eyes, only distraction. One Saturday morning, Charlotte met her best friend Amelia Clark for coffee. Amelia, as always, looked perfect, her blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders, her tailored coat hugging her frame. People often joked that Amelia was the glamorous one while Charlotte was the sweet one. They had grown up together, shared secrets, dreams, heartbreaks. Charlotte trusted Amelia more than anyone. As they sat down, Charlotte hesitated, then whispered, "I'm pregnant." Amelia's gray eyes widened. "Charlotte, wow, that's big news." Charlotte smiled shyly. "I haven't told many people yet. Just James. He didn't react the way I expected." Amelia tilted her head, her lips curving into something between a smile and a smirk. "Men get scared. But he'll come around. You two are solid." Charlotte nodded, wanting to believe it. "You're right. He just needs time." But she didn't notice the flicker of triumph in Amelia's eyes. That evening, when James came home, Charlotte tried to bridge the distance. "We should start planning, don't you think? A nursery, maybe names." James sighed heavily. "Charlotte, can we not do this right now? I've had a long day. Her heart ached. She wanted to scream, to ask why he felt so far away. But instead, she stayed quiet, convincing herself it was just a phase. In the quiet hours of the night, as she lay awake with her hand on her belly, Charlotte whispered to her unborn child, "It's okay. Daddy just needs time. He'll love you. He'll love us." But deep inside, fear was beginning to bloom. It was a rainy Thursday when Charlotte's world first began to unravel. She had left work early, eager to surprise James with dinner. Carrying a bag of groceries, she hummed softly as she unlocked the door to his flat. Inside, the lights were dim, and she heard voices, James's deep murmur, and another softer voice she recognized instantly. Amelia. Her best friend. Charlotte froze. Why was Amelia here? She pushed the thought aside. Maybe Amelia had come by to drop something off. They were all friends, after all. But as she stepped into the living room, the sight stopped her cold. Amelia was sitting far too close to James on the sofa, her hand resting on his arm. Their conversation cut off mid-sentence as they both looked up, startled. "Charlotte!" Amelia exclaimed, standing quickly. "I was just keeping James company while you were at work." James forced a smile. "Yeah, she just dropped by." Charlotte's chest tightened. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Something about the way they moved apart, the way their eyes flickered with unease, it didn't feel innocent. But she swallowed her suspicion. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. "Right," Charlotte said softly, setting the groceries down. "I was just surprised." Amelia gave her a quick hug, her perfume lingering long after she left. That night, Charlotte curled up in bed, unable to shake the image of Amelia's hand on James's arm. It seemed small, but something inside her screamed that it was the beginning of something much darker. And she was right. The weeks that followed were suffocating. Charlotte felt trapped in a strange limbo, half suspicion, half denial. James continued to come home late, and Amelia's visits became more frequent. Always with excuses, "Just checking on you, wanted to see how you're doing." Charlotte's mother, Margaret, noticed her daughter's unease during Sunday dinner. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said gently, pouring her tea. Charlotte forced a smile. "Just work. And the pregnancy, I suppose." Margaret reached across the table, her hazel eyes searching. "Charlotte, don't let anyone dim your light. If something's wrong, you need to face it." Charlotte wanted to confess everything, the distance, the suspicion clawing at her chest, but she stayed silent. She didn't want to seem paranoid. One night, unable to sleep, Charlotte reached for James's phone while he showered. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. She told herself she'd only glance quickly, just to ease her mind. But what she found shattered her world. Dozens of messages. Between James and Amelia. "I can't stop thinking about you. When will you tell her?" "Soon. I just need to figure it out." Her vision blurred with tears. She dropped the phone as though it burned her skin. The betrayal cut so deep she could barely breathe. James emerged from the shower, towel around his waist. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing her pale face. Charlotte couldn't speak. She simply stared at him, her heart breaking into pieces. The next morning, Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands trembling. She had barely slept. When James entered, sipping his coffee, she finally spoke. "How long?" He froze. "What are you talking about?" Her voice cracked. "Don't play games. How long have you been seeing Amelia?" His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "Charlotte, I saw the messages, James," she shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How could you? With her. My best friend." He slammed his mug on the counter. "You weren't supposed to see that." The words sliced through her. You weren't supposed to see that. Not an apology. Not denial. Just frustration at being caught. Do you even love me? She whispered, clutching her stomach instinctively. James ran a hand through his hair. Charlotte, it's complicated. I care about you. But Amelia, she makes me feel alive. You've changed since the pregnancy. You're different. Her heart shattered. Different? I'm carrying your child. He couldn't meet her eyes. I never wanted it like this. Amelia and we're in love. The room spun around her. She felt sick, broken, hollow. And in that moment, Charlotte realized her world would never be the same again. Charlotte couldn't remember how she got through the rest of that day. It was as though she was walking through a fog, every sound muffled, every color drained of meaning. James's words replayed in her head like a cruel echo. Amelia and we're in love. Her best friend. The girl she had shared secrets with during sleepovers, the girl who had stood by her during her father's funeral, the girl she thought would one day be godmother to her child. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was a knife to the heart of every memory they had shared. Charlotte thought about confronting Amelia immediately. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone, but when she opened Amelia's contact, she froze. What could she say? How could she even begin to express the depth of her devastation? Instead, she put the phone down and pressed her hands against her belly. You still have me, she whispered to her unborn child. No one can take that away. When James came home that evening, Charlotte didn't speak to him. She moved through the flat like a ghost, silent and detached. He didn't try to comfort her. He didn't apologize. Instead, he sat scrolling on his phone, smiling faintly at the screen, as though she wasn't even there. The silence was worse than shouting. It told her everything she needed to know. That night, as Charlotte lay awake, she realized she had lost both her partner and her best friend in a single blow. Her world was falling apart, and yet, somehow, she would need to keep going, for the tiny life growing inside her. Charlotte lasted another week in the flat. She tried to convince herself that James would come to his senses, that Amelia would realize what she was destroying. But each day was worse than the last. James was gone more often than not, and when he was home, his presence was colder than any empty room. One night, Charlotte found him packing a bag. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't look at her. "I'm staying at Amelia's tonight." Her chest tightened. "You're not even hiding it anymore?" James sighed impatiently. "What's the point? You already know. Charlotte, we can't pretend anymore. I don't love you the way I love her." Her hands clutched the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "I'm carrying your child. How can you walk away from us?" James zipped his bag and finally looked at her. "Because this isn't what I want. I didn't sign up for this life. I'm sorry." But he wasn't sorry. Not in the way she needed him to be. His eyes held no remorse, only determination. That night, after he left, Charlotte cried harder than she ever had in her life. Her sobs shook her entire body until exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. When she woke the next morning, her pillow was damp, but her decision was clear. She couldn't live like this anymore. She had to leave. Moving back in with her mother was both humiliating and comforting. Margaret opened the door with open arms, her face softening with both worry and love. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, holding her daughter tightly. "You don't need to say a word. I already know." Charlotte broke down in her mother's arms, the weight of the betrayal finally spilling out in sobs and broken sentences. Margaret didn't judge. She didn't ask why Charlotte hadn't seen the signs sooner. She simply held her and whispered, "You're not alone. You'll never be alone." But Charlotte did feel alone. At night, when the house was quiet, she lay awake, replaying memories with Amelia, the laughter, the promises, the loyalty that now felt like a cruel joke. She had expected heartbreak from men. It was part of life, after all. But from Amelia? That was a wound that wouldn't heal easily. James, meanwhile, didn't contact her for days. When he finally did, it was with cold practicality. "We should talk about arrangements," his message read. Arrangements. As though their child was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Charlotte threw her phone across the room, the screen cracking against the wall. For the first time, she realized James might never truly be a father to her baby. She would have to do this alone. The thought terrified her. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of strength began to stir. Charlotte thought she had seen the worst of it. But she hadn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later, she received the news in the cruelest way possible, through social media. Amelia had posted a picture of herself and James, arms wrapped around each other, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Forever starts now." Ringed. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred as she stared at the sparkling diamond on Amelia's finger. Her best friend. Her partner. Engaged. The comments poured in, congratulations, heart emojis, people gushing about how perfect they looked together. Perfect. The word made Charlotte sick. She felt like the entire world was laughing at her. Everyone would know. Everyone would see that the man she loved had left her pregnant and alone to marry her closest friend. When Margaret found her curled up on the sofa, phone clutched in her hand, she didn't need to ask. She took one look at the screen and her face hardened. "That selfish bastard," she muttered. But Charlotte could barely hear her. Her heart was breaking all over again, each beat a reminder of the betrayal that had destroyed her. That night, she made a promise to herself. She would not let James and Amelia destroy her completely. She still had a life to live. She still had a child to protect. The weeks that followed were brutal. Charlotte felt the weight of every whisper, every sideways glance when she walked into a cafe or down the street. People loved gossip, and her story was irresistible. Betrayal, pregnancy, a stolen fiancé. But life has a way of bringing unexpected light, even in the darkest moments. It happened at her first prenatal appointment at the hospital. Nervous and shaky, Charlotte sat alone in the waiting room until a doctor with kind brown eyes called her name. Charlotte Hayes. She followed him into the examination room. "I'm Dr. Daniel Reed," he said warmly. "We'll be looking after you and your little one." Something about his gentle tone soothed her. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as the abandoned woman or the betrayed friend, but as a human being who mattered. Throughout the appointment, Daniel explained everything with patience, answering her questions without judgment. When Charlotte's voice wavered as she mentioned that the father wasn't involved, Daniel didn't flinch. He simply nodded and said, "Then we'll make sure you have all the support you need." When the ultrasound screen lit up with the tiny flutter of her baby's heartbeat, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. But this time, they weren't only tears of pain. They were tears of hope. For the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life without James. Maybe her story wasn't over after all. Charlotte did her best to avoid seeing James and Amelia. London was a vast city, yet somehow it felt small, as if every corner hid memories of them. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. One afternoon, while shopping for baby clothes with her mother, Charlotte turned a corner in the boutique and froze. There they were, James and Amelia, laughing as they picked out linens for what was clearly their wedding registry. Amelia spotted her first. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. She straightened, placing her hand on James's arm as though to stake her claim. "Charlotte," Amelia said smoothly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "What a surprise!" Charlotte's chest tightened. "Surprise is one word for it," she replied, her voice trembling. James looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Charlotte," he said, almost cautiously, as though she might break in front of him. But Charlotte refused to crumble. She held her head high, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You've made your choice. And so have I." She turned and walked away, every step shaking, every heartbeat echoing with pain. Margaret followed close behind, her eyes burning with anger. "Don't let them see you cry," Margaret whispered once they were outside. Charlotte nodded, blinking back tears. She had promised herself she wouldn't give James or Amelia the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. Yet when she got home that evening, she collapsed into her bed and sobbed until there were no tears left. She wondered how two people she had loved so deeply could have betrayed her so completely. But deep inside, she also felt something shift. Seeing them together, flaunting their betrayal, lit a fire in her. She wasn't going to let them define her story anymore. The next blow came in the form of an ivory envelope. Charlotte found it in her postbox one chilly morning, her name written in Amelia's elegant script. With trembling hands, she tore it open. Inside was an invitation, the marriage of James Whitmore and Amelia Clark, to be held at St. Mary's Church. Her stomach turned. The sheer audacity of it left her speechless. They hadn't just stolen her future, they were parading it before her eyes. Margaret was furious when Charlotte showed her. "How dare they send you this? As if you'd attend, as if you'd smile and clap while they stand there gloating." Charlotte's hands shook as she set the invitation down. "They want me to see it," she whispered. "They want me to know I've been replaced." For days, the invitation sat on her dresser, a cruel reminder. Every time she passed it, she felt her chest ache. She imagined Amelia walking down the aisle in white, James waiting with that charming smile he once reserved for her. But then she'd place her hand on her belly, reminding herself of what truly mattered. Her child wasn't a symbol of loss, it was a reason to fight for happiness again. When the day of the wedding finally came, Charlotte didn't go. Instead, she spent it with her mother, sitting by the fire, sipping tea, and feeling her baby kick for the first time. She placed her hand on her stomach, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're my future," she whispered. "Not them. Never them." Months passed, and Charlotte focused on preparing for motherhood. But news of James and Amelia's marriage was impossible to escape. Friends whispered, neighbors gossiped. At first, Amelia flaunted her new role. Social media overflowed with photos, romantic getaways, expensive dinners, the perfect couple. But behind the facade, cracks began to show. Charlotte heard whispers from mutual friends. Amelia was jealous, insecure. James worked late, and rumors of his flirtations spread quickly. The same charm that once lured Charlotte had now turned on Amelia. One afternoon, Charlotte received a call she never expected. It was Amelia. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Charlotte," she whispered, "I made a mistake." Charlotte's heart pounded. "Why are you calling me?" Tears crackled through the receiver. "James, he isn't who I thought he was. He doesn't come home. He lies. I thought taking him from you would make me happy, but I was wrong." Charlotte closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly. For years, Amelia had been her confidant, her sister in everything but blood. Now she was the architect of her deepest wounds. "You betrayed me," Charlotte said quietly. "You don't get to call me now." Amelia sobbed. I needed someone to talk to. I thought you'd understand." But Charlotte only felt a cold clarity. "I do understand. And that's exactly why I can't be that person for you anymore." She hung up, her hands shaking. For the first time, she didn't feel crushed by Amelia's words. Instead, she felt free. Amelia's world was crumbling, and Charlotte realized she no longer needed to carry that weight. The day Charlotte gave birth was the hardest and most beautiful of her life. Hours of pain, sweat, and tears culminated in the cry of a tiny baby placed gently in her arms. "A little girl," the nurse said softly. "She's perfect." Charlotte stared down at her daughter, her heart swelling. Green eyes blinked up at her, so much like her own. "Hello, my love," she whispered. "It's just you and me now." Margaret wept beside her, stroking her daughter's hair. "You did it, Charlotte. You're stronger than you know." James never came. He didn't call, didn't ask, didn't show. But Charlotte didn't care anymore. She realized in that moment that she didn't need him. She had everything she needed in the tiny bundle in her arms. Over the following weeks, Charlotte adjusted to sleepless nights and endless feedings. It was exhausting, overwhelming, but also beautiful. Every time her daughter grasped her finger, every sleepy smile, every quiet moment reminded Charlotte that she had purpose again. And slowly, she began to rebuild. With her mother's help, she decorated a small nursery. She took her daughter for walks in the park. And at her follow-up appointments, she found herself looking forward to seeing Dr. Daniel Reed. Daniel's kindness never wavered. He asked about her health, about the baby, but also about her life. He never pried, never judged. And one afternoon as they chatted, Charlotte realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in months. Time has a way of healing wounds, though scars always remain. A year after James left her, Charlotte sat in the park with her daughter nestled in her stroller, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Her life wasn't perfect. She still carried the ache of betrayal, the memories of what could have been. But she also carried something far greater, strength she never knew she had. James and Amelia's marriage had quickly unraveled. She had heard whispers of screaming matches, of James's infidelity, of Amelia finally realizing that what began in betrayal could never end in happiness. They were separated within a year. Charlotte didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Life had its own way of balancing things. Instead, she focused on her daughter, her reason to keep going, her light in the darkness. And slowly, she opened her heart again. Daniel had become more than just her doctor. He had become a friend, and perhaps, in time, something more. As she watched her daughter giggle at the fluttering leaves above, Charlotte whispered, "We're going to be okay." Because she had learned the most important truth of all, betrayal may break you, but it can also remake you. Charlotte Hayes had been left pregnant, abandoned, and betrayed. But she rose from the ashes, stronger than ever, proving that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply building a beautiful life after the storm.